So, welcome to the 6.2 notes for AP Computer Science. Last time we talked about the basics. We talked about JFrame, and that's the window, not the content. And then we talked about Jpanel, which would be the content that you would put in the JFrame. Now, Jpanel is something called a component, and there's many other components, which we will talk about shortly. But Jpanel is kind of special because we are going to be using it for two main purposes. Last time we talked about how we can use it as a container, so we can add other components like JButtons or JLabels to a JPanel. We can even add other JPanels and kind of nest them within each other, and then add different layouts to get the kind of desired look that we want. But we didn't talk about this one, and that's what we're going to talk about today, is using a JPanel as a drawing surface. So we can actually draw different shapes and fonts on the actual JPanel. And so for that, we're going to have to customize JPanel, and we'll get there in a second. So let's go ahead and take a look at our more detailed notes here. I'm not going to go through it all, but basically today our main goal is to draw on a JPanel, and we're going to talk about graphics and painting. So any component is just a visual element, like I said, buttons, menus, boxes, sliders, and they would all be a subclass of java.auth.component. And so every component knows how to draw itself, and so most of the time, like if you're just using a button, you don't have to worry about how to draw the button. It knows how to draw itself, sliders, everything like that. But if you want to do something a little bit more customized, something not included in the standard classes, you need to define your own component class by creating a subclass of panel. Okay, so again, that's what we did in this example here. You extend JPanel, and then what you want to do is you're going to override. This is an override called paint component. Okay, so any J component has its drawing method here in paint component, and so the normal default is there. And what we're going to do is we're going to override it and create our own. Now, a few things about this paint component. It is a little bit different than a normal method. It is called by the system, not you. And so it's going to be called when the system is ready. So you're not going to call paint component any more than you would call main. System calls main, system calls paint component. You just write what happens when the system calls it. Okay? Now, to do any drawing at all, you need a graphics context. So it's going to carry different state information. That's why it's a context. Every graphics context belongs to this java.auth.G graphics, and we'll talk about things that are available to us there. So let's take a look here. So that's why this paint component here, first thing we want to do is, if we're going to override it to do our own custom drawing, we want to first call the superclass paint component. Remember, this is actually just your own override. There's a regular paint component here. So call the super first. What does that do? That's actually just going to fill in the panel's background color. But you usually want to do that. So first off, we're going to call super.paintComponent. And then we're going to do all of our stuff. So in general, we want to make sure everything, like with drawing, any drawing of shapes or whatever, is going to be done inside this paint component. What if you want to redraw? Like, what if you shifted the coordinates of something, you want that to show up? You do not, again, you do not call paint component directly. You inform the system that it needs to be redrawn. So you don't call paint component, you call this something called repaint. All right? Repaint tells the system, hey, when you get the chance, please redraw everything based on the instructions I provided in paint component. Okay? So repaint returns immediately without painting itself. The system will call paint component as soon as it gets the chance. There might be several repaint calls handled by one paint component call. So you just have to be aware of that. Let's see. Here's a big change that we have to be aware of. So paint component must be smart enough to correctly redraw the components every time. So in other words, I like to kind of compare this to when you're drawing something of animation versus claymation. Okay, so if you think about it, let's say you're drawing like a fighting game, and you have this guy standing there, and you want to just move his arm up a little bit. Unfortunately, you can't just say move his arm up a little bit, right? That would be like claymation. In fact, I found this little claymation video. So like when you're making claymation, like you take a picture of the guy here, and then let's say you want to make a change. You just kind of move the arm slightly. Everything else stays the same, right? All you have to do is move the arm, and then you're good, and then it gets reflected there. Unfortunately, that's not how it works for us. So you can't just say move the arm this way, everything else stays the same. The paint component method has to redraw everything from scratch every time. So it's more like this, like a hand-drawn animation. Like when you're drawing stuff, like, when Disney draws stuff for cartoons, if I'm drawing this woman running here, and let's notice how her head stays the same, her legs are moving back and forth, but you can't just draw the legs moving, you have to redraw everything from scratch from every frame. So think about that's what you have to do in paint component. You have to redraw everything, even if it didn't move from scratch. So what does that mean? As the note said, you have to store the state of your animation or whatever it is in some instance variables. Otherwise, how are you going to redraw everything? And we'll see some examples of that. All right, coordinates, again, as I talked about, 0, 0 is in the upper left-hand corner. This is your x, your width. This is your y, height. You can use get width and get height for any components, J buttons, J sliders, J text fields, but in particular Jpanels, right? We're going to work with Jpanels a lot. You can use get height and get width to get these guys. So, as I said, oftentimes you want to have stuff like, calculate the width, calculate the height, and use that to draw your component. I'm going to skip through a lot of this here, but color, we've worked with it a little bit. Oftentimes you can take a RGB, red, green, blue, as its parameters in the constructor. You can also use the hue, saturation, and brightness. Fonts, there's fonts that you can set. I'm going to pause a little bit more here, though. So when we're finally getting down to drawing, there's several things here. This little g is often what we use in our graphics context. It's the name of our graphics context object. So we can call stuff like draw string. And you can draw a string at this coordinate. XY, by the way, is the upper left-hand corner of where it would be drawn. We can draw a line. We can draw a rectangle, which we'll do. We can draw an oval, we can draw round rectangles, 3D rectangles. These are all not filled in. When it says draw, it's not filled in. And then when you say stuff like fill, that would be filled in. So you can do fill rect, you can do fill oval, fill round rect, and that would be the filled in version. There is one small difference here, and I'm going to highlight it, although I think this actually depends on the system, because as I did this, my Macintosh that I'm running this on did not actually do this, but the difference between draw rect, which is the kind of outline version, and fill rect, which is the filled in version, the draw rect will actually draw an extra pixel along the right and bottom edge. So if you're drawing something, it'll actually go one over. And that would mean that if you want to draw around the edge of the component, you would do from 0, 0 all the way to the width -1. Because if you did the whole width, since it gives you one extra pixel, it'll actually go off the edge. Okay, it talks about graphics 2D, which we're not going to work with too much. You can just copy the lines that are given to you. And really, I think that's it. So I want to go ahead and try an example now. We're going to go through and draw and kind of improve on our drawing in 3 stages here. All right, so again, let me just load up the 6.2 notes here. So again, we're talking about components. Again, component is any subclass of java.auth.component. In fact, all those are also javax.swing.j components are all components. So we're looking at components such as Jpanel, JLabel, JTextField. Again, most of them we're going to use the standard. They all know how to draw themselves with paint component. You do not have to override it. The only one we're going to customize and extend is Jpanel. Right? We're doing that to do our own drawings. So again, our main point we learned is we're going to extend Jpanel, and then we're going to override this paint component. We've got graphics G as our parameter, and we often want to call super.paint component to draw the background color, and then we can do stuff like whatever. We can do whatever kind of type of drawing we want in here. All drawing is in here, not anywhere else. And then we want to store the state in our instance variables, like what the color is, what the coordinates are, if we're dragging or not. Second of all, we learned that to redraw a component, we want to call repaint. The component.repaint, it'll inform the system. This needs to be redrawn We never call it manually. The system will call it. Okay, so let's go to Eclipse or whatever you are using. And let's go ahead and just let's do this from scratch. Let's go ahead and do our main first. Again, from now on, after this, you can just kind of copy paste, but I want to do one more just so we get just one more practice here. Oops. Let's go ahead and create a new file called Drawing Panel Main. Drawing Panel Main. Drawing Panel Main. All right, and so this is going to be our main method. So public static void main string array of args that we're not going to use. Okay, so we are going to be using JFrame and Jpanel in here. So let's just import javax.swing.star so we don't have to do them both separately. All right, and again, from now on, you can pretty much just copy and paste most of these, but we're going to create a JFrame, and again, that's the window, not the content, so we'll call it window equals new JFrame, and we'll give it a title like whatever you want. Rectangles, whatever you want to call it. And then JFrame objects have several methods, so we can set the size. So we can hard code this. We can set the location, so where it's going to start off. So 0, 0 will be the upper left-hand corner. I'll make mine a little bit farther in and down. We're going to set visible, so I want it to be true. So if yours is not showing up, make sure you've set it to be visible. And finally, what happens when we close it? I'm going to set the default close operation to be jframe.exit on close. So that's all. Just you can copy and paste that, play around with the variables like we did last time, but you don't have to retype this from now on. You can just copy and paste it and make any adjustments you need. Now remember, there's no content here. If you run this, there's just an outer shell. So what we want to do then is we want to create some kind of Jpanel, right, which would be your content. And then you're going to use this content as the content for the window. So we'd say window.setContentPane as this Jpanel here. Okay, so this Jpanel is your content pane. Okay, so that's the basics. Now, what I want to do then is I don't want to use a regular Jpanel. Like I said, we want to customize our Jpanel. We want to create our own class that is a Jpanel. So let's go ahead and do that now. Let's go ahead and go File, New, Class. Let's call it Drawing Panel. Okay, so Drawing Panel is going to be a Jpanel. So see if you remember, go ahead and type in, how do you say that, hey, this is a Jpanel, and then I'm just going to add a bunch of other stuff as well. What was that keyword? Go ahead and fill it in, please. Okay, so hopefully you remembered it is Drawing Panel extends Jpanel. Don't know what that was. All right, so mine's giving an error because I have to import that as well. So let's go ahead and import javax.swing.star. So it's Jpanel, JFrame, all those J buttons. And then also we have like graphics and things like that belong to the older one, so java.awt.star. Oops. So let's do both of those. Okay. So before we forget, now that we've defined our own custom Jpanel class, let's go ahead and change this. Let's go back to main and let's go ahead and change this to be not a Jpanel but a drawing panel. So there we go. All right, so now we've set that. Let's go ahead and practice. Again, our main goal is to use this Jpanel as a way to draw, not as a container like we did last time. So if you remember, the main thing we learned is that we're going to override the default Jpanel method. Okay. So this again was public void paint component. and it takes in graphics G, or you don't have to call it G, but whatever you want, but paint component. This is an override. This is an override. And so again, the key things, we never call manually. The system calls. Right? If you want to inform the system to do this, you should call repaint. Right? Repaint. Okay, so we can do stuff like, well, first off, again, this is an override, so we want to just, as a habit, call super.paintComponent, pass along the G. Again, that's going to just fill in with the background color. And then afterwards, anything that we do in here is going to be reflected. So we can use G. Like I said, there was many instance methods with G. So draw a line, draw a rect, draw a string, fill rect. These will all appear, if we put the coordinates correctly, inside the Jpanel. So I could do something like draw string system called paint component, and we're going to need a counter. Let's keep track of how many times that we have repainted. So let's just have a counter here. We're going to have it as a member variable here, so we call it counter equals 0. So every time paint component is called, let's just iterate counter, and so then we could say counter times. Okay. So this will show up. Now draw string will also take in where we're going to draw this. So let's just go ahead and put it, where do we put the coordinates? Where is it going to get drawn? Let's put it at 100, 100. Okay, 100, 100. Okay, so right now it doesn't really do much. Let's go ahead and run it and see if that works. So go to drawing panel main, and let's see here. All right, so so the issue with this is it's not actually drawing it right away, and I remember now, this is kind of this weird thing, but this might come up with you as well. So the system will redraw it every time I resize my window. So let me drag this up here. If I drag the bottom right hand corner, I can see, okay, now it's saying it's called paint component, so on and so forth times. I can see it calling paint component over and over and over again, but it didn't actually call it right away. And I remember it's this little quirk here. If you go back to main, if you set visible as true before setting your Jpanel content pane, for some reason that makes it so it's not called right away. So set visible to be true afterwards, and now it should work. So oops, get rid of that little debugging statement. So now if we run it, it should, yeah, so there we go. So if you do that, it should have it. And right now, for us, the only way we know how to get this paint component to be called is to resize the window. So again, if you just resize the window, you can see it go over and over again. It's getting called. Okay, so that's pretty boring so far, but at least we've got something up. Okay, now let's get it so that we can draw a rectangle. Let's make it a green rectangle outlined in black, and let's make it appear at different places throughout the frame. Okay, so I'm going to have, and again, a rectangle is drawn with an X and a Y. A rectangle is drawn with an X and a Y. Now, so I want my X and my Y to be random, right? So math.random, and it could be whatever you want. I'll just do like 300. Okay? And again, that's a double, so I need to cast this as an int. And I'll paste that in. And so I'm drawing the string. I can leave that here. In fact, let's just do one little application of fonts. If you ever want to work with fonts, you could do g.setFont. This is not like super important. And you can do a new font object, pass in, there's several keywords. So I'll do serif, and there's some static methods like font.bold, font.italic, and you can put the size like 14 or whatever you want. This is not super important, I just wanted to show you an example. But so I've got X and Y here. Let me just paste that down here. Okay, so I want to draw a rectangle, and so I could use the g.drawRect. And so I'm using this random variable between 0 and 300. And I could randomly generate the width and the height as well, but to keep things simple, let's just make it 100. Okay, so this means, again, every time I call pin component, again, this is getting called over and over again, every time I resize it, it should give me a new rectangle at a different spot. So let's go ahead and run it and see what happens. So there it is, and if we keep resizing it, we can see, yep, there it is, it's kind of dancing around. Okay, and let me just remind you now that we also have a fill rect. We have a fill rect as well, and that will fill it. Let's fill it with green. Now remember, G is a graphics is a context, and so it remembers what the current graphics is. It's almost like you've got a pen and you're going to switch colors that you're holding. So I would do something like g.setColor, and I can do, again, these are static methods, static fields, excuse me, color.green. Keep it uppercase here. And now I'm going to do g.fillRect, and I'm going to use the exact same X and Y. Let's do 100 and 100. Okay, let's see what happens here. All right, so there it is. And if I move it around, so you notice it's jumping around, it's following that draw right there. Now actually, systems do vary slightly with that that coordinate thing where I told you where the draw rect actually draws one extra pixel to the right and down, and so it's probably a little bit safer actually to do the fill rect first. So I'm going to do that. So fill rect, and then I'm going to reset the context to be black, and then I'm going to draw rect. So that way we are not going to have a problem with the pixels. It'll draw the filled in rectangle first, and it'll draw over that with the black. And you can see, yeah, that looks better. Okay.